Hi guys, this is George from Art of George, and in this video I will take you through a quick overview on how I paint the details on this Leonardo piece that I sculpted in Zbrush. This will be a short video and more of an introduction on how I work, but I do plan to create more videos that goes into more specific details in certain areas of my process. Feel free to leave some suggestions for me on topics you want me to cover from my work or art in general in the comments. In this artwork, I didn't go too far with the sculpt since I will be doing most of the work in Photoshop. These days, I mainly use a hybrid of 2D and 3D to create my illustrations. I still paint strict 2D pieces every now and then, and when I do, they are mainly on my personal pieces so I can stay sharp and hopefully keep improving in that area. So this version of Leonardo is referenced from the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. This is my favorite rendition of the turtles, both in their look and story. As I mentioned, I didn't go too far with the sculpt, but I do take it to another 3D software I use, which is Maya, so I can add some basic lights and materials. I then frame it and then render it, and that's pretty much it. Nothing really too fancy here. So here in Photoshop, I will start refining the basic render by painting the textures on his skin and adding imperfections such as cracks and dirt on his shell, and also adding a background. There are projects where the sculpts are much more basic than this because sometimes there isn't enough time to invest on it because of tight deadlines. Or sometimes a simple shape is all that's needed to move forward. It really differs for each piece. There are times where I really take the sculpt to a more refined level and all I do is a simple color and contrast adjustment in Photoshop at the end. A lot of artists today use some version of a 2D, 3D hybrid process. And for me, it began when I read one of James Gurney's own process in his book, Imaginative Realism. He is the creator of a book series called Dinotopia, and overall a great artist that can paint dinosaurs and ancient civilizations realistically. I will post a link in the descriptions to his blog, which is rich of useful art theory and tips, or check out his YouTube channel, which will also be in the description. One of his processes, he would sculpt simple, sometimes refined clay models that he would photograph to use for lighting and perspective reference for his painting. So I did that digitally by sculpting models in Zbrush to light and render in Maya, which will also be used as reference when I do a painting. That eventually evolved to actually working on top of those renders rather than just referencing from it. This saved me a lot of time when doing client work. I use a lot of reference and they are usually displayed in another monitor. In this case, they are mainly photos of Leonardo himself on how he looked like in the film. I always use reference as it helps me to go beyond what I know and I never fully depend on the visual library that's in my head. If I'm painting a dragon-like creature, I will have references of reptiles or amphibians if I'm heading into that direction. If I want to be a bit more creative, I will look for different references of other animals or other interesting objects that can help break the mold of what a dragon can look like. Using references of the real world creates a sense of believability as it's something familiar the viewer can relate to. Another technique I use are alpha channels. I will do a separate, more detailed video on this, but basically I use alpha channels in addition with the lasso tool or pen tool to isolate certain areas and use its black and white values to adjust the tones and color. You can use it for other filters as well. It's a very useful technique to be able to achieve natural and subtle looking transitions when using certain effects and adjustments. This is where I start painting the background. I referenced one of the sewer sets from the film and didn't go too far in terms of changes to it. I also didn't go too much into detail and being more loose with it because there will be a depth of field effect using the field blur in Photoshop. I just painted it enough to get a sense of what is behind him. The brushes I use are mainly the default brushes, which are the smooth airbrush and a slightly modified hard brush. Both of these brushes do most of the work when it comes to digitally painting a piece for me. They do all the sketching, shading, blending, and even the line and detailing work. I just swap between these brushes depending on what feels right for the image at that time. I do use a few custom brushes that I quickly made a while back, and they help speed up the texturing process. They can also help break up colors and tones quickly. I keep it very basic when I create them by adjusting only a few variables in the brush settings to randomize the angle, shapes and flow. That's basically it. There's not much thought process beyond it other than that. I would probably explore more on creating brushes in the future, as I want to start creating more painterly pieces in addition to what I do now. When it comes to layers, I'm a bit more loose on my personal projects. By that I mean I just usually let them build up. For example, if I want to try to paint something different but I'm unsure of it, I will add another layer and continue to paint. Or if I introduce a texture or image and use one of Photoshop's layer blend modes, I then add another layer to start painting on top of that to see if I can successfully blend it with everything else. Once I'm confident with all of those actions, I usually merge all of those layers to simplify it. Sometimes it may take a lot of layers before I do that because I may not be as confident. When I use a hybrid process, I usually keep the original render on its own layer for comparison along the way, like this Leonardo piece. When it comes to quick speed paints, sketches, they are just usually 1 to 2 layers. With client work, I'm a bit more strategic with it, to make sure certain layers can be turned on or off to show some possibilities during the meetings. Or I will add another layer during the meetings and do quick paint overs on the feedback that they are giving me, so they see a rough interpretation of their notes. Okay, we are coming to the end of this video, and I'm pretty happy on how Leonardo turned out. Hopefully you see a bit of insight on how I work in this short video. As I mentioned earlier, I will post more videos that explains my process in a lot more detail. If there is anything specific in relation to technique, tools, softwares, or art in general, you are more than welcome to suggest them in the comments. Thanks for watching.